welcome to the Deviant Mind. This is your host, Dominika.
And I'm Chris.
And we are going to talk about one of the cases we were talking about that we were going to do from last week. And that is the case of Nancy Brophy, which I think we're going to call this case, for Chris, came up with a great idea of calling it Murder, She Wrote. So this is Murder, She Wrote Part 1, which is the case of Nancy Brophy. But as we were texting back and forth, you mentioned that there were some, what are they called? Updates on some of the cases that we've talked about.
Oh, in the past or like right now?
Well, right now, you said that there was,
so in the Idaho case, is this what you're talking about? Like the most recent cases that are floating around, or like with Nancy and Utah?
Oh, you know what? I just realized that we haven't actually done the Chris Watts case, so never mind.
That's another interesting thing that came up was Chris Watts' mistress. I know we haven't gone into that.
No,
we haven't. Those out there who remember, the mistress is now, they're saying there's more information coming out about her involvement in the killing of Chris Watts' family. Apparently, John Ramsey has said that they recently found DNA in his daughter's murder case. So I don't know exactly what's going on with that. The Idaho case, I believe he pleaded not guilty.
Yeah.
I believe that the case is going to trial in maybe, June. Mm-hmm. I don't know when in June.
Okay.
But yeah, so those are some of the big things going on. And then the Doomsday Mom got life in prison.
Right.
Yeah.
We will definitely probably cover her in the upcoming weeks because that's a totally kooky case.
Yeah.
But this week we are doing Nancy Crampton Brophy. And spoiler alert, she did it. But let's start at the beginning. So on the morning of June 2nd, 2018, Chef Daniel Brophy went to work at the Oregon Culinary Institute, and it was a Saturday, and he disarmed the alarm at 7:21 a.m. His coworker came into the building at 7:30 a.m., but didn't discover his body until 8 a.m. when she let students enter the building for the classes. His body was found in the rear kitchen by students. He'd been shot 2 times, once in the back and once in the chest, and both pierced him through the heart. So, of course, the police were called. And they searched the school and they found no signs of force or struggle. And they saw no signs of motive. And that included robbery, assault, or other crime. Right. Daniel still had his wallet on him. There was nothing missing from the wallet, as they could tell. His cell phone was still there, his eyeglasses, and car keys. And
that morning apparently was supposed to be a live fire for all the students, which means they set up pop-up restaurants. Mm-hmm. And in preparation, he wanted to get there early. So he got there especially early. He had been a chef for 10, maybe 12 years. And apparently the students loved him. He was always there early to prepare. He was very approachable. And then eventually the community would grow to love him and his wife. But really, he was at the center. He was doing more for the community at this time. So.
Yes, definitely. And that's, he had actually been in the full food industry for over 50 years.
Yeah.
He had been the lead chef instructor at the Oregon Culinary Institute since 2006.
Right.
He had also worked at the Cordon Bleu Institute in Portland, which is actually where he met Nancy Brophy. He was an expert in marine biology. He was a master gardener and a mushroom expert. And he loved going on mushroom hunting expeditions, field trips, I guess you would call, with his students. He loved leading those field trips, and he actually tried his hand at keeping bees. And he had a pretty extensive vegetable garden in the back of his home. And he lived in Beaverton, Oregon with his wife, Nancy, who was an author. So her website. So we're going to go into this because I actually went through her website is down now, but I went through the Wayback Machine and found some very interesting things. But on her website, she wrote, this is a quote: "I can't tell you when I fell in love with my husband, but I relate the moment I decided to marry him. I was in the bath. It was a big tub. I expected him to join me, and when he was delayed, I called out, 'Are you coming?' His answer convinced me he was Mr. Right. 'Yes, but I'm making hors d'oeuvres.' Can you imagine spending the rest of your life without a man like that?" End
Oh my
quote.
God. And then, you know what's interesting? Was that under her blog post from 2011, How to Murder Your Husband? Because she
No,
actually, okay, that was, I guess, before.
well, actually, that wasn't even a blog post. It was so she was a self published romance author.
Right.
And she had actually written articles for other people's blogs. So that
That's
article
right.
was
That's
actually
right.
posted in, I believe, C. Jane Wright,
Mhm.
um, from there, in which we're going to go into how fascinating this case is on how the prosecution and the police actually kind of caught her.
So
Um,
as a personal note, on a side note, you yourself, Dominika, are a writer,
I
right?
am, and I
And
write crime
so,
novels, and
right.
we've talked extensively on my search
Yes.
history. So,
Yeah. Our search histories are crazy.
yeah, so that is definitely was eye-opening to see what I mean, obviously, I'm not gonna do anything like that, but it
Right.
is crazy how, that can bite you, and actually, she tried to hide her, her search history because well,
Right.
anyway, we will get to that, but,
But
um
so I just wanted to know, do you feel like cases like this and the mother in Utah, do they give, writers such as yourself like a bad name? Is there always like, do you think there's a stigma now created by a
no,
case
not
like
at
this?
it's interesting because, that you should mention it as stigma because a lot I self-publish very proudly,
Hmm.
and, these other women that we're gonna talk about did self-publish as well,
Hmm.
and one of the things that I found very interesting is that one of the issues that a lot of self-publishers have is that we're not, quote, unquote, "real writers" as far as the general
I
population
see.
is concerned, because there's
Right.
that moniker of like self-published. So you didn't go through the whole process of being vetted, even though most everybody that I know, I mean, we hire our own editors. Like we're essentially publishing houses. So
Sure.
we have a whole team of people working on these books. They're not just us, in the
Right.
room. So as I was going and doing the research for this, it was interesting that every news article, which by the way, there's a Lifetime movie that was made of this with Sybil Shepherd and
Great.
Steve Gutenberg, which is like, come on. Um,
Let's go.
I mean, come on. But every article I wrote just called her a romance author. And
Yeah.
just there was no
There was a little
stigma.
suspense, right? Wasn't there like a
Yeah,
tinge
it was
of suspense
her.
in her stuff?
Yeah, her romance novels are of the, romantic suspense variety. So I
Right.
think it's like The Wrong Husband, The Wrong Seal. She had this like whole series about, which I find very interesting, about finding the wrong person and then finding the right person.
Hmm.
And but anyway, so going back to that, like everywhere I saw, they just
Yeah.
called her an author, which for
Yeah.
a number of years, that has been something that self-published authors have been fighting for, being like, hey, we're actually small business owners. We are publishing houses. We hire
Right.
a ton of people to work on these books. This isn't just like some crappy pamphlet that you put out onto Amazon.
And the thing
Um,
is, it's like in different industries, one can self-produce their own film and self-distribute it on Amazon. You can do that. You can create your own music, self-distribute online. So
yeah.
we do live in this age where, we're able to produce original content and do it on our own. But it's interesting that there's like that assumption of writers who self-publish. I really wasn't aware of that.
Well, and it's gotten much, much better.
Good.
when at the beginning, like, because I've been self-publishing since like 2012. Like at the
Mhm.
beginning, back in the early days, people were like, "Oh God, what are you doing?" But there is so much freedom to be able to find your own readers and really focus on the work and not have to focus trying to get through this gauntlet of publishing houses, which by the way is a complete racket. They give you shit
Yeah.
contracts and you
Yeah.
make so very little money. And they don't actually even market you, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
So going back to her, so so anyway, it was interesting how nobody like said that about her in a derogatory manner. It just shows how far that industry has come because she's just a romance author who
Mhm.
wrote these books and of course ended up killing her husband. But going back to her husband, when he was killed, as Chris mentioned, he was a very, very popular teacher. And there were some quotes that were left on the school's Facebook page from his students. And
Mhm.
I have some of them just to kind of show the kind of guy he was. There was one quote, he was both the biggest pain and the biggest inspiration I had there. End quote. One student wrote, quote, sometimes we really resented him for his snark and bluntness, but he was also one of the smartest, most thoughtful people I've ever met and would take the time to help with whatever you needed. And so, again, he was just really, really loved, except for by his
Mm.
wife, which um,
Right.
he was doing some shady stuff. So, during the time that he was in the school, she and this was surveillance video that was later watched by the police, showed her driving her Toyota minivan at 7:08 by the front of the OCI building, which is the Oregon Culinary Institute. And then she
Yeah.
was seen leaving the area in that same car at 7:28 a.m. Now, because she thought she was smarter than everybody else, she
Right.
arrived back at the Oregon Culinary Institute, driving that same Toyota minivan that was seen on surveillance
Yeah.
very quickly after the detectives arrived at the scene.
She had said, by the way, that she was home.
Oh,
So
yes.
she initially denied that drive by, her initial drive by.
Yes. But, video still,
Yeah.
AI hasn't come yet because it was 2018. That
Yeah.
video still is good. It's not a deep fake.
Yeah.
But she never actually, even through her entire trial, she never made an explanation. Um, she didn't try to deny it or explain it. And in her trial, she actually had a psychologist say that she just couldn't remember because she was traumatized. So,
Right.
you're right. So she,
Yeah.
so the officers, when she arrived at the scene, said like, well, okay, what are you doing here? Where have you been? And she said that she'd been home that morning and she hadn't left her house until she was called about an incident at OCI. Now, I couldn't figure out who called her, whether it was the police or if it was one of the students, because she had been
Right.
married to this man for 26 years. So I would
Absolutely.
assume people are like, oh, gotta call the wife if you find Daniel dead. And she gave the police a timeline of when Daniel left the house. But again,
Yeah.
she really tried to stick to her story that she had stayed home. Now,
She
for
was acting weird as well, from what I understand at the time that she was talking to investigators at the scene.
do
Uh,
tell, how weird.
just like her manner is, there was no real grief. It was as though she knew something was wrong, but once she's finding out what's going on, it doesn't affect her as you would expect one would, especially for a couple that had been married for so long. By
Mhm,
all accounts, also from the neighbors and family, they had a beautiful relationship. Like
mhm,
they adored one another. He really took good care of her. And to give a little more backstory, she had been married to a cop initially. That was her first marriage. And then they moved to Portland, where she met Dan at a different culinary school in the early 90s.
mhm,
And he was married at the time with the son,
mhm.
but then the two of them just fell for one another and uh, eventually got married.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it was, when I found her website through the Wayback Machine, The way
Yeah.
that she wrote about herself was really, really odd. And now, of course, whenever you're reading people's bios, you're like, okay, it always seems kind of awkward.
Right.
And literally her first line is writers are liars. And she's like, I don't remember who said that, but it's not true. And she goes on to talk about how she digs deep and unearths portion of her life. And sometimes it's better to change the ending, which again, there's always like this negativity to her, this bio, which again is writing about her life. And
Yeah.
the thing that kind of really struck me is how before that quote that I read out, that the way that she wrote, she said that, and this is directly quoting from her about page, is that her imaginary friends that she writes about, they live larger than life lives, and they always have happy endings because again she's writing romance, but
Yeah.
her personal life is never as clearly defined. And she said, her beginnings are hard to locate.
Yeah.
There's weird middles, and she's like, it's always kind of a link in the chain. And she says that she's married to a chef, and that she lives with chickens and turkeys in her backyard,
Right.
fabulous vegetable garden. But then she says, for those of you who have longed for this, let me caution you. The old adage is true. Be careful what you wish for. When the gods are truly angry, they grant us our wishes, and the payment is always high.
Oh,
And I'm like, um,
wow.
okay, well, you don't sound like a very happy woman right there. And
Yeah.
again, we're kind of going into what her own words means, but like, again, I have a bio. I don't really talk about my relationship with my husband in such a way,
Right.
obviously at all. But most authors don't go so deep into, I don't know, it just shows that there was issues. And this was from, um, it looks like it was from 2000, and it was on her website in 2018, which was the year that she actually killed her husband. And she's like, like all marriages, we've had our ups and downs, more good times than
Hmm.
bad.
Hmm.
And they were, I guess, living in an apartment because their house was being rebuilt from a house fire. And that's, again, it's just, this doesn't sound like a very happy woman.
No, she's not. And I think a lot of that may stem from what his son said in his impact statement at her hearing, that she was very shallow in a shell.
Hmm.
And, the and my research found that the one job she had was she was working for um, a pension company, uh, and then decided to get into writing. He claimed that she was very shallow and felt in the shadow of his father. Obviously, he's in
Right.
the community, he's doing all these things, and she's just like trying to focus on writing, trying to make a name for herself, something. And folks who have read her books actually say they're boring, that they're
Mm.
just kind of very formulaic. And so again, as his son mentions in court, like I think that may have something to do with a lot of this. Like he's the breadwinner, like she just wants to contribute in some way, but she doesn't know how.
Right, right, exactly. So going back to the day that the body is found, you said that she was acting weird. She also said that, of course, again, something out of a book, her
Hmm.
husband had no enemies and she had no idea who'd want to kill him.
Right.
The police also asked if Daniel ever brought a gun to work to protect himself, and Nancy said that she had recently purchased a Glock 9mm handgun, but they hadn't used it yet, and he did not bring it to work. So she, of course, gave this Glock to the police. And Leland Samuelson at the Oregon State Crime Lab, he analyzed the bullets that came from Daniel's body. And he said that they were most likely shot from a Glock 9mm. However,
Yeah.
when he tested the gun, it was determined it was not the firearm that shot and killed Daniel because the grooves on the bullets were different. So for those people who don't write about crime or know about guns, typically when um, a bullet comes out of the barrel of a gun, it creates striations in the bullet that you can match to see. And it's always very specific because not every gun has the same kind of it doesn't create the same striations it's like a fingerprint essentially. And so they were like, okay, well, this Glock that she gave them, it
Mhm.
wasn't the gun that was used to kill her husband.
Right.
Yes.
Oh, another interesting thing is, okay, in terms of her acting weird,
Mhm.
uh, when she's told that her husband's been shot, she says by an AR-15, and then they're like, why why would you assume that? And her response is, oh, because of all these school shootings.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I guess that would be like a good sort
Get
of
off my trail.
cover. Right,
Yeah, right.
exactly.
Like, oh, it must, yeah. Was it an AR-15? But I just find that your husband's been shot. Like, oh my God. There's none
Right.
of that.
None of
There's a
that.
sad look on her face, but she's kind of like, oh, was it an AR-15? Like, tell me, what kind of firearm killed my husband?
Right. Like, exactly. Like, what? Like, what is this?
Yeah.
Um,
But this Glock is interesting.
yeah, which actually ends up the Glock is the linchpin in the case that gets her prosecuted. So on June 5th, 2018, Nancy, calls the lead detective, whose name is Darren Posey, and asks for a letter from him saying that she was not a suspect for her husband's murder because she needed to provide it to her life insurance company. She said, when the police asked, is like, oh, it's interesting. You have life insurance on him. Well, how much is it? She says, oh, it's only 40K. So the detectives are like, okay, well,
Yes.
a husband is dead. He has no enemies. He's well beloved in the community. Guess what? We're looking at you because you're the wife. And at this point, we've seen footage of you
Wait, you
driving
said
by.
you said 40K, right?
Well, this is the key thing. It's interesting because this was so I read a lot of this from the arresting affidavit. So
Okay.
this was
I thought it was 40.
initially no, this
Yeah.
initially what she said was 40.
Right.
And the detectives refused to give her the letter. And
Right.
then they started calling insurance carriers being like, "Hey, who has an insurance policy on this guy?"
Right.
And so they discovered in the affidavit that it was
Yeah.
the amount of insurance policies was in the amount of 350K. Now,
But then
what's
he had two other policies.
but
From
that
what I
only came
understand,
out in trial. So
like
in the trial
right.
documents, you
Right.
find out that actually the full total was 1.5 and not the 350. So, but she was arrested on the lying about the 40K to the 350.
Right.
And
And also,
then,
this is 3 days later. She's having this conversation with the lead investigator about the insurance policy. 3 days after her husband's death.
yeah.
Let's find out who did this. How can this be? But no, I got to find out what's the deal with the insurance policy.
Right, exactly. And this was around the time that Daniel's son was actually helping her and trying to be there for her because he's like,
Yeah.
okay, your husband has been murdered and that's a very violent act, which I know that he talked about in papers later. He was very angry about the fact
Yeah.
that he had come to be her support in this trying time and she was just trying to figure out how to get the money. So, the police radar was like, okay, this is something's going on here. So they went through Daniel's phone and they found that the couple had a joint iTunes account. And through the joint iTunes account, they were able to see the search history. And I'm not quite sure how. And this is the initial kind of deep dive they go into the search history. They found that someone had searched for, quote, 10 ways to cover up a murder. And so she was arrested on September 5th, 2018. And as she was being arrested, she said, quote, "You're arresting me?" End quote. Then added, quote, "You must think I murdered my husband." End quote. So
I mean, it's
Yeah,
either that or that I
right.
killed one
Uh,
of the Murdochs.
right, exactly. But what was really fascinating about this is what the police and then the investigators and the prosecution held as the main theory of the case. Because, as we said about before, that the murder weapon didn't match the ballistics of the bullets that were found in Daniel's body. However, she had been searching for a ghost gun, which is
Yeah,
an unregistered and untraceable firearm. And what they had, so their theory was that Nancy had swapped out the slide and barrel of her Glock
yeah,
17 with a different set to murder her husband and then reinstalled the originals. So
yeah,
then, therefore, the ballistics wouldn't match. And when they saw a photo of the Glock that she gave them, they noticed that the slide and barrel weren't properly seated, which
yeah,
is how they really started with their suspicions. And so um, they
yeah,
went looking into her computers. Now, they had done a full on search and because they didn't have any other digital evidence, like there was
right.
um, no weird phone calls. There were no weird text messages, but they were like, okay, well, we found through her iTunes that somebody had, typed in how to cover up a murder.
Hmm.
And so they were like, okay, we need to find out when she purchased this Glock and from who, whether she did purchase a ghost gun. And they had these three computers that they had found. One was found in a closet, another one was on her bed, and then the final computer was recovered from a storage unit. So they decided to turn to a digital investigation platform
Yeah,
developed by Magnet Forensics. And they started analyzing all this digital evidence that were on these computers. And so this is actually one of those interesting cases that has been in kind of the police world of being like, wow, this was really interesting that they built their case entirely around internet evidence and it was
yeah,
all search history. And
yeah.
um
Just as that case about I'm blanking on her name, but the girl from Plainville uh,
mhm,
who suggested that her boyfriend go ahead and kill himself. He gets out of the car and she says, "Could you just get back in?" I believe that was the first case that relied heavily on text messages. So we are
mm,
definitely living in this world now, right? Where it's like, wow, here goes a treasure trove of all of her information, which she claims was just part of her research. Like she
right,
wasn't even done. Hey, I'm
right.
writing this book. This is just research.
Right, exactly. Which, I mean, again, except for she has a dead husband, so there is that.
Yeah,
So they didn't find anything on the computers on her in the storage unit or on her bed, but the one in the closet was a whole different thing. So they followed breadcrumbs and she had been searching for a ghost gun kit
yeah,
from November 2017. So this is definitely premeditated. And there was a ton of search results from November 2017 to March 2018.
mhm,
And uh, it's, not totally strange to be looking up Glock 17 purchases. But then she was also looking on how to break the gun down to a barrel and slide. And then
yeah,
she was researching ghost guns and trying to figure out when they were sold. She was also looking to whether Glocks had big kickbacks. She was
yeah.
searching for videos on ghost guns. And then in February 2018, she started looking on where to buy a gun locally. So the
Right.
searches included gun shops in Portland. When do you have to register a gun in Oregon? And
Shows. I
the
think Sean
shows, which she did end up buying the gun that the police got from her
her
home
husband
at a
apparently gave her the money. Her
well, yeah.
husband's right
Yeah,
said, "Here, take this money. Go ahead. You
exactly.
should get one."
So she bought that that gun at a local gun show. But then she started visiting eBay
Yeah.
for Glock slides and barrels, and she actually won an auction for those items. And then she started looking at videos about how to clean a Glock, how to load a Glock, and how to disassemble a Glock. And then, of course, 3 months later, Daniel Brophy is murdered. And um, they found the ghost gun kit and they found the Glock 17. But what they never found was the additional slide and barrel that she ordered on eBay.
And they found the kit.
Yeah, they found the kit, but they never
Yeah.
actually found the
Yeah.
slide and barrel because
Yeah.
it's probably underwater somewhere.
I was just going to say, I'm surprised she didn't use the eBay defense. In other words, hey, if this is premeditated and I wanted to do it immediately, I would have bought it now. But instead, I did an auction.
Right. Right.
But
Exactly.
this whole gun parts, which later she would go on to say, again, part of research, her character in her book, it's about how the character disposes the gun and then is able to use it again. So,
Right. And so the motive that the prosecutors gave at trial was that the Brophies were struggling financially. The
yeah.
fall before Daniel Brophy was killed, they had taken out $35,000 from his retirement account, which was about half its total, to catch up with mortgage and credit card payments. And she, in her defense, was like, well, I would have done much better with my husband alive. And because we were cashing in the retirement plans and they intended to downsize their property. And her defense was speculating that Daniel's murder could have been a robbery gone wrong, except for, again, there was nothing robbed.
Yeah.
And then we come to the How to Murder Your Husband. And
Yeah.
it was the website called See Jane Publish. Now, in her trial, the judge excluded the essay from trial, but the prosecutor did quote its themes without mentioning it by name.
And then I
And
beg your pardon, what's 10 ways to cover up a murder?
that was originally the first kind of trail they got from
Okay.
the iTunes account to be like, hey, wait a minute, we
Got it.
got to look at the wife again.
Yeah.
But this was also something that they had found that she had written. And as you said, it was written a while back. It was 2011.
Was it excluded because of under First Amendment?
I'm not sure. I couldn't find why, and I didn't watch the trial. Did you watch the trial?
I watched her a lot of her testimony.
Okay.
And boy, wow. I mean, she's a storyteller. You know, you watch her and you could see her brain working. You know, she's very uncomfortable. There are certain questions asked by the prosecution, which she'll say, she'll ask a question. Like the prosecutor will ask her a question and she'll answer by asking him a question, you know, and really just gives way too much information. You know, it's the type of thing where it was, I think one of the questions that she was just basically horrible on the stand. She couldn't answer why she was near the scene at the time,
Mhm.
you know, the video of the car. And instead of just coming up with something, she leads off by saying like, oh, I went to a Starbucks. But she keeps going. I went to a Starbucks. I think it was Thursday. It was pretty crowded. So I was able, but I stood online, you know, I got my coffee. And then from the coffee, I was able to get back. You just answer the question. But because she's in this frame of mind, I'm a writer. I can develop stories. People can believe me. Again, this is just another opportunity I feel when she's on the stand to be a writer and prove that she is intelligent. You know, I think she was trying to get away with what she deemed the perfect crime. So that's the part I really focused on and I saw was her her sentencing and her testimony. Her test is just horrible. She incriminates herself.
Right, 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 right. No, and she also, I guess, I didn't realize this, but she spent $15,000 for the gun and the gun parts and the ghost gun.
Wow.
Um, which is kind of insane if they're taking $35,000 out of their retirement account to just pay
Yeah.
for their mortgage. So I'm like, where'd she get that whole money from? I mean, you said that she had given her that money, but it's like $15,000.
But
Um,
well, the thing is, he said that he gave her like $400,
mhm.
and then when her credit card was last used, she took out 400 or something like this. Something about how like he always had cash, and she basically spent 400, which came back to bite her in the butt because they said, "Well, what happened to the other 400?" And then to which she says, "Well, I had to get a an oil thing to clean it. I got a book on how to properly use a Glock.
Mhm.
That's like $30. So like what happened to all that other money?" It's just like that. So that's kind of weird. But from what I understand, again, there were two other life insurance policies he had, which ultimately totaled a lot of money,
Yeah,
right?
which was $1.5 million. And of course,
Right. Okay.
and if all he has in his retirement account is $35,000, that's not retirement money. I mean, she was
Yeah.
72, he was 63, but that's not money for retirement at all. So
Right.
I mean, it sounded like, yeah, $1.5 million check. She's thinking she's gonna like go riding off into the sunset. Um, I
She
was
claimed
just
it was never about the money.
Right, which I mean, then what was it about then? Exactly. Like, come on. And then the defense had a psychologist, and they claimed that she suffered retrograde amnesia from the trauma of finding
Mhm.
out about her husband being murdered, which is why she couldn't exactly tell people what she was doing driving by his workplace at the exact time that he was killed. And now she drove by at 7:08, but then they didn't see her car or her driving until 7:28. So she had that 15 minutes to go
Yeah.
in. He probably let her in and she killed him
Yeah.
because
See,
the
I also
alarm was done.
understand she says that when she's grilled about the gun and like, hey, how are you with the gun? Like your husband had a gun. Like, what would you do with the gun? And she said, monkey around with it, but like I didn't know how to do the slide thing. It was just so difficult. And there are gun owners who say it's actually pretty easy. It's just take the slide it out in the barrel. So she lies about that, and then she's asked, "So did you go to shooting ranges? How did you practice using the gun?" And I went out in the backyard mostly, and would just shoot around. And they have a ping from her cell phone near a shooting range, uh, to which she claims that there is a lot of property for them to buy, and they were considering buying some property, either flipping it or moving. And so that's why she was in the vicinity. So it's
Mm,
just for everything that they brought up, she just had like a quick response. And obviously, again, being a storyteller, I feel like she just had created all this story. A lot of it just sounded so rehearsed, you know?
yeah. Well, and that's what the jury thought. It was rehearsed and not
Yeah,
true because she was found guilty for second-degree murder on May 2022. She had a 7-week trial and she was sentenced to life in prison. And I think the next possibility chance of parole was in 25 years, which most
yeah,
likely she will not be around. And she is serving her sentence at the Coffee Creek Correctional Facility in Wilsonville, Oregon. And it was actually 1.4 million. And that she was going to own their $300,000 home, which
right.
again, it's like, yeah, I don't know. Divorce, like, I never quite understand why people kill their spouses. Like, it's just something that I just don't
She
understand, especially when it
apparently,
comes for the money. Like, why don't you just divorce them? Like, what's the problem here?
right. Um, It's also interesting to note that there apparently might have been a jail confession. I think
Oh,
maybe I don't perhaps in holding her, but apparently an inmate testified that
hmm,
uh, you know, that she admitted to her that she did kill her husband. I don't know if that's after her sentencing, but I'm pretty sure if she testified that it happened before. Uh, but informants, you take it or
yeah,
leave it.
yeah, exactly. Those are a little tricky.
It's a lesser charge. Just recently watched a bunch of interviews and did some research on Diane Downs, who I was never really familiar with. She was a killer of her children.
Mhm.
Actually, two survived. She shot them point
Mhm.
blank. One passed away and two survived. One's paralyzed. But at the time, uh, she was diagnosed psychotic, and in the rankings, she's between uh, the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, and Ted Bundy.
Wow.
So it's really interesting because off the bat, you rarely see female psychopaths,
Mhm.
right? Uh, but there's her behavior comes very close to. I don't think that Nancy here is a psychopath. I think maybe if anything, uh, she got wrapped up in her writing. Maybe was the writing a red herring for the past 12 years? Is this something that she had been thinking about over
Well,
time? What do you think?
I mean, I personally just reading from her bio, she just sounded like she was not happy in her marriage.
Right.
And uh she
She
thought
just doesn't seem like a psychopath to me.
no, it just seems like a woman. And again, I don't understand this thinking being like, "Oh, there's a lot of money on the table. Nobody's going to find me out." Because the insurance companies aren't like evil and never want to pay things out. So she's like, "Oh,
Right.
$1.5 million. Yeah, I'll be able to get that if my husband dies mysteriously and then I have retirement and then I don't have to worry about it."
Hmm.
So, but that to me seems so weird because as we know here in the United States, insurance companies will do anything in their power not to pay out. And like
Yeah.
I don't know. And that's typically you're always the first suspect when your spouse dies, and that includes
Of
both men
course.
and women. And I mean, I guess maybe she thought she was too smart. Like it's like, oh, I'm a crime writer. I know how to do all of this. This shouldn't be
Right.
difficult. I can pull this off for that $1.5 million. And I'm like, really, you're gonna go like life in prison because you're most likely gonna get caught for like a measly $1.5 million. Like, I never
Yeah.
understand the money amounts equal to a human's life either. I'm like, how did you think this was a good idea? Like that just
It's a
it's so
power thing,
weird.
power and greed. It's very weird, and it's to my understanding they yet to find the ghost gun. Is this
Yeah,
true?
they've never been able to find the slide or the barrel, and I don't think they will. I mean, she probably tossed them somewhere or buried them
Right.
in the garden, like who knows? But they were never able to find it.
Also, during her testimony, it's interesting that she keeps looking over her defense team. It's like she'll say something and look over, for like approval, or like, "Ooh, did I say the wrong thing?" Like she can't tell what's going on.
It's
You
so
know.
weird. I mean, I'm. Are you gonna watch the Sybil Shepherd
Now
and
that I know about it, of
Gutenberg
course,
film? I
I'll
was like,
totally
oh
watch
my
that.
god, this is crazy. And now she gets a movie made about her because it's kind of insane. And again,
Yeah,
I do think there must have been, I mean, I guess some narcissism going on around there being like, I'm so smart, I'm never
so
gonna get
smart.
caught.
Yeah.
Um, and then
And just like
obviously,
in the other case, I was, in Murder She Wrote Part Two,
yes,
you'll see that's also regarding life insurance policies.
yeah, yeah.
It always that seems to be I again like. Do you think this was a long time? 26 years is a long time, right?
26 years is a long time to be living with somebody, and the fact that nobody of the neighbors or the son thought it was a bad relationship. Like they all said it was such a great relationship. So
Right.
that is also
Yeah.
crazy. So I don't know. I mean,
Do
it's
you think it
just,
was a long time coming? And she,
I mean,
I mean, because her
26
writing is
years,
dark. Her writing is dark, right? She writes mostly romance, but then she'll write the dark stuff online,
but that
right?
was
About
only like,
marriage.
I mean, but that was only for 8 years. Like, what was she doing for the other 19 years? Like, that's what I'm saying. Like,
So,
it just, it's
right.
weird.
It is weird, but it is her fallback. So I'm wondering if like this is like something that she had always wanted to do, but like, how can I get away with it? This is how you get away with it. Like, hey, I
Yeah.
just wrote about it. Doesn't mean I did it, you know?
Right. Right. And
But I
I
don't know.
just,
That's elaborate. That's really elaborate.
that is very elaborate, and I just keep thinking it's like, "Come on, ladies, you can make your own money. Like, go do it. Go make some money.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
believe in yourself." Like, I just it's hard for me to Yeah, it's hard for me to wrap around when you have supposedly a good marriage with a decent man who, by the way, was like 10 years younger than her too.
Yes.
So I'm like,
And he was very supportive of her writing. From what I understand, she wasn't making that much money
yeah,
from it, but he was still very supportive. And yeah,
yeah.
I mean, I think that probably bothered her too. Like this whole, like, hey, go make your own money, lady. Like, you could do it too. But then I think when your hopes get shattered, you're not maybe as well known as you'd like to be, maybe not that many. And then
There
like,
is never, I mean, I again, maybe
I
in
don't
her
know.
mind, but there is like never a reason to take another person's life. Period.
Absolutely.
Like,
Absolutely.
so,
I'm just trying to figure out a motive. I'm just trying to figure out how she goes from
well,
that.
I
And
mean,
also she's
again,
married to a cop. So there's that. Like she's married to a cop and then she meets Dan, right? And
mhm,
then Dan's also married, but then they meet, like there's some sort of attraction, obviously, that they have towards one another. But then you just go back and it's like, what did she learn anything from the cop? Like it's interesting she married a cop, like that's kind of an odd thing. And then maybe there's like a bit of resentment, like I feel like I feel the motive is ultimately resentment,
the
like,
resentment. Well, that and also like, did this woman have any friends? Like through all of the articles that I read, there was never any friend like
yeah.
come in to say like, no, she didn't do it, or yeah, I've known her for a long time. It was just neighbors. So I mean, I guess maybe the isolation of like, I don't know. I mean, it's a weird one because she doesn't, well, but then reading her bio, there's like definitely dark undercurrents of unhappiness and not being happy with the way her life turned out and regrets. And but that's still, I mean,
Mhm.
how does that go to like killing the man that you supposedly love and has been so good to you for the last 26 years? Like that's like,
Yes.
what is happening there? That's
And
just
his family
crazy.
was very accepting of her at the time. I mean, look,
Yeah.
listen to that situation. Both of them are married, they're having an affair, and then it blossoms, they get married.
Oh, so
And
they actually had an affair that broke up their marriages?
I believe it was like this attract. Yeah, they just fell for one another, and they were like, "See ya" to their respective
Oh,
spouses.
interesting.
And
Interesting.
so the son was just like, "Okay, you're my stepmom," and his mom and his parents were very supportive. They basically welcomed her and embraced her into the family. So, is it a thrill kill? Is it just jealousy? I just, a deviant mind. What would drive in me a deviant mind, especially? Yeah, there's this whole thing, and we'll see again in the next case. Why can't you get a divorce? You could just get a divorce and move on. It's
Yeah.
just
And with
it's
the next case, she had kids. She would get alimony. She'd get child support. Like what
absolutely,
is the, I mean, that case is just nuts too. But
yeah.
anyway, we will talk about that next week.
Oh,
So so that was the case of Nancy Brophy in Murder She Wrote Part 1. Murder She Wrote Part 2 will be next week. Yes.
quick question: Do you know if her books are still available? Because next week's subject, her book was pulled like after a
Oh,
month.
let me see. I'm
I'm
looking
curious if
now.
Brophy's books are still available.
Let's
You can't
see.
find a copy of if you were here or if you were here anymore, the children's grief book.
She has, yeah, her books are still up.
Wow,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. So at least one of them, The Wrong Husband.
The wrong
Wrong Never Felt
husband.
So Right, book 4.
There you go. The wrong husband.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there you have it. So so that was an interesting case. And good job
Nice
for
little
the,
plug
again, the
for her
police.
books. That
I
was a
know,
nice
right?
plug.
It didn't look like it sold well. It didn't have very many reviews.
Right.
But
Yeah.
uh so yeah, so thanks. Leave We're starting our social media finally. I'm trying to get Chris onto the Instagram and Facebook hate me, but I'm going to try to figure it out. And so yeah, if you like us, listen, subscribe, and leave us a review, and we read all of them. And till next time. Thank you. This episode was sponsored by The Creek Killer, book 1 in the Harriet Harper thriller series written by me, Dominika Best. What would you do if you read the police found your body in a creek? Find out in The Creek Killer, available on Amazon. Thank you for joining me and listening to this episode. If you like my show, please give me a rating and review. It helps other listeners find this podcast. Follow Dominika Best Presents The Deviant Mind wherever you listen to your podcasts. Visit thebeststorytellingnetwork.com, where you'll find show notes, my books, links to social media, and much more. Join my Patreon for special subscriber perks, like 2 extra exclusive episodes a month and a Q&A with me at patreon.com/The Deviant Mind Podcast. Until next time.